Welcome to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 14. The best way to pursue happiness is to help other people. Nothing else will make you happier. George Lucas.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, guys, to another great show. Today we have a topic that I'm going to be talking about that is very near and dear to my heart. But before I get into it, make sure you head on over to freefilmbook.com. That's freefilmbook.com and get your free audiobook immediately. So one thing I wanted to talk about, and it's something I've seen so much time. I mean, I've delivered over 100 different independent film projects over the years, not including over 1,000, including all the commercials, promotions, music videos, and other things I've done. The one thing I've seen common problem with not only all of those, but specifically with independent film, in the technical aspect of it, is post-production workflow. A lot of independent filmmakers who are not technically inclined trust a lot of times the people around them to just take care of all this stuff for them. And it is such, I've seen so many filmmakers fail miserably to the point where their movies look horrible, can't get finished, they can't get distribution, they can't get it sold because they didn't figure out workflow. So let me explain to you what post-production workflow is. It's understanding the workflow all the way from production to final deliverable, and I'll go over that with you in a second. So basically, when you're on set, you're going to shoot on a camera. Okay, based on that camera, you see the old workflow was much easier. It was film. So film was film, and the workflow was the same for 90 years, almost 100 years. The workflow never really changed for the most part. But now there's new cameras, new formats, new aspect ratios. Everything's changing daily. So workflow is more important now than it ever has been before. So let's say you're gonna shoot a movie that is a $50,000 movie, let's say for an instance, and you've got a DP who has a brand new Red Dragon 6K. And he's like, we're going to shoot this 6K. And I've got these lenses I'm going to be using and all this great stuff. But we're going to shoot 6K. We don't have a lot of light, so don't worry about the light because the Dragon will pick up everything. Well, mistake number one, the Dragon will not pick up everything. You still need light. But back to workflow. I don't want to get into to my colorist. I want to take my colorist hat off and put my post-production supervisor hat on. So let's say you have that Red Dragon and you shoot the whole movie on Red Dragon. Now, unfortunately, you don't have money for post. So you were going to edit this on your laptop at home with Premiere or Final Cut or any other editing software. But let's say you're going to do it with Premiere, which could handle 6K natively. But unfortunately, you're doing this on a laptop and your drives aren't fast enough. So you can't really edit it. You can't even watch it. You can't even do anything with it. So you got this beautiful, or at least this huge amount of footage on a format that you really can't do anything with. So now, where you thought you didn't have any money, that you weren't going to spend any money, you're now going to spend money because now you got to go hire an editor who can handle this workflow, who can handle not the workflow, but can handle these files. Now, that's step one. Now, let's say you find an editor that runs Premiere natively. You're great. If not, you might have to find a guy who's cutting on Final Cut 7, and he's going to transcode everything, which will take you, depending on the kind of system he has, could take you weeks of transcoding just to get it into a format that he can edit. And then once he's done editing it, let's say you lock that cut. I'm not even talking about visual effects. I'm not even talking about speed changes, ramps, recomposition. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm just talking the basic stuff. All those other things I just talked about are bigger headaches that will create more and more problems in your workflow. So I'm just going to take you through the basics and then we'll go back and talk a little bit about the other stuff. So then you're going to have this guy edit your movie. All right. So let's say he's able to edit natively. Let's say the best case scenario. Well, once he's done editing this, and this one workflow, we're going to say native. Native meaning that he's just taking the raw files and editing those raw files. Once he's done doing that, then he has to, once he's done editing, and let's say you've locked the picture, well, now you've got to send all your red files and all your EDL, edit decision list, to a colorist to color this, because red without color grading it's garbage. You have to color grade. All your movies have to be color graded, or else you're never going to be able to sell it. It has to have some sort of professional look to it. So now you send it over to a colorist who has to hopefully be able to understand red, Premiere EDL, and then also handle red. So a system that's strong enough and big enough to handle red. So let's say you go to a DaVinci system, which is kind of industry standard now. But let's say you go to a guy who has color, for God's sakes, or is trying to color grade this in Adobe, or color grading this in Final Cut X, or Baselight, or Scratch, or a million other different colors. They all have a color system. They all have to be able to talk to each other, whatever the color system is. I use DaVinci. It is the industry standard for especially for indie film. But you have to have a system that's going to be able to handle 6K files. And that's if you shot everything at 6K. Let me go back for a second. You might have shot some stuff slow-mo. And if you shot some stuff slow-mo, guess what? It's not 6K anymore. It's going to drop down to 5, 4, 3, and 2K, depending on how fast you go. So now you have to take that into consideration. So let's take that into color grading. So now he color grades the whole thing. And again, I'm doing this the best case scenario. I'll throw some worst case scenarios at you in a minute. So he colors grades it, the whole thing, but he has to make sure, you have to make sure his system can handle it. He has a calibrated monitor so you actually see the color that you're seeing is an actual correct representation of the color. Once he's done with it, then he has to render it out. And now you have to figure out where you're going with this. So if you're going to a digital format, there's a lot of talk about 4K right now, and I know in the future this is going to sound old-fashioned, but for right now, at the moment that we are in 2015, 4K is still a bit of a pig to master to. It's doable. I master to 4K all the time now, but I also have a juiced-up system that can handle that. More than likely, 2K is going to be more than fine for you, and more than likely, 1080p is going to be more than fine for you, depending on your movie, depending on what you're trying to do. If you can master at 4K for future-proofing your project, 2K is industry standard right now, and most people master at 2K. You'll be fine. And many movies I've mastered are at 1080p. Actually, most, I would say 95% of all the movies I've ever mastered or worked on mastered at 1080p, because that was the standard as well. So once he renders it out, you have to render it out to a QuickTime. And who's going to online this for you? Now, the online process is once all those files go back to an editor who puts it all together for you. You have to put together the audio. You have to put together any graphics. And then I'll get to visual effects in a second. But let's say you have visual effects shots coming in. Those have to be placed on, and all these kind of problems happen. You have to make sure the new system that's going to be able to handle whatever he outputs, which could be DPX files, which could be QuickTime files, which could be a bunch of different type of formats. I'm not trying to scare you here, but I'm trying to impress upon you how complicated this process can be, especially when you're dealing at the upper echelon of files. So we started off with a red camera. This conversation is completely different if we're starting off with a 5D, a Blackmagic, but the concepts are all still there. You still have to be able to handle these file formats and be able to have the hard drive space, be able to have a clean workflow. Preferably you'd hire someone like myself, or at least consult someone like me. I'm telling you, if you hire someone like me for an hour conversation and you pay their hourly rate, whoever that might be, a post-production supervisor or something, and they can just draft out a workflow for you, my God, that will save you so much time. And you do this before you ever shoot. If you have a budget and you have a little bit more money, you hire them for the shoot, and they can kind of supervise this entire process. It's so important, especially with the plethora of formats that you were dealing with today. It's absolutely nuts. And every day I'm getting new, like, oh, this is a new file format. Oh, this is a new file format. Which is one of the reasons why I love DaVinci so much, because DaVinci reads everything and works with everybody. DaVinci is one of the best color systems and online systems out there right now for the best bang for the buck, without question. So anyway, you go back, you get back to your online situation. You online everything, and then you output. Now you can output to a DCP, you can output to a ProRes file, you can output to DPX files, which will go to a DCP, and then the QuickTime. There's so many different options. So we'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Going back, let's say you're shooting on a Blackmagic. I have a Blackmagic cinema camera, and you shoot ProRes. Well, that makes life so much easier, and that might be perfect for what you're trying to do. You shoot on ProRes 422 HQ. You take it into any editing system almost that's worth its weight is going to be able to handle ProRes. You edit it all. There's no big files to deal with. You can do that on your laptop, no problem at all. And that might just be what you can afford, regardless if you have a freaking Alexa or a Red shooting 6K RAW. You might not be able to handle that, and it might take you 2 years to finish your movie. Or you can shoot ProRes, shoot with a smaller camera that still looks gorgeous. Get your kind of movie, your movie done. Edit it yourself. You have complete control of it. Send it over to a colorist. Any colorist is going to be able to handle ProRes without question. They color it. They send it back to you. But when you're shooting ProRes, you have to make sure you have an amazing DP who really understands lighting and things like that, because you start bringing down your formats or your kind of file format or your camera. The lighting has to be much better. I can save a lot as a colorist. I can save a lot in a red file, because the red file does have a lot of information in it, or in a raw file from Blackmagic, or a raw file from Alexa or Sony or things like that. But when you start getting into more of those compressed files, like a ProRes file, or God forbid a 5D, MP4, which is the lowest quality you can shoot with. If you're trying to do something else, you better have a really great DP to be able to make that image look good. If not, you're done. Like, you've wasted your time. So I'm very passionate about this, because I've seen so many movies die in post. I've been brought in to save many, many movies purely because they did not understand workflow. It was such an important part of the post-production process. Without workflow, you've got nothing. And I didn't even touch upon audio workflow, making sure that when you lock your cut, that final cut has to stay locked. That information sends to the colorist, and you also send that to your sound people to be able to match everything perfectly. If one frame goes off, everything goes out of whack. I mean, I can go on and on and on. There's so much information to be done. So if you have a low-budget movie, use a camera that gives you a beautiful image. A Blackmagic camera is perfect, because I'm not a big fan of the 5Ds and 7D cameras, because you really need to have a really good lighting scenario or shoot a lot of stuff outside. But even then, you've got to protect yourself from blown highlights and things like that. So the range that the Blackmagic camera gives you is a lot better than the 5D or 7D, and it's approximately the same price point. And the workflow is a lot easier as well. So you get a big fatter file and so on. So I like the Blackmagic. It's all preference, but on a technical standpoint, an MP4 file is so low on the totem pole versus a ProRes file, which then goes into the higher res formats like a DPX, XLR, or the raw files. So I would use a Blackmagic if you're going to do a low budget movie or something equivalent. Even if you shoot Alexa has ProRes. You can shoot 2K or 4K ProRes files. If that's the workflow you can handle, great. The new Reds are being able to shoot ProRes files as well. So you might be able to just, if your workflow can't handle Red, transcode everything from Red to ProRes and work with it. I would suggest against it. That's what the reason you're shooting with Red, but so on and so forth. I'm kind of babbling a little bit here. I'm sorry. But basic takeaway from this episode is workflow. Understand your workflow. Get people who understand workflow clearly to give you a guide on how to finish your movie, because if not, it will sit and die in post. And I've seen it happen multiple times. So hire someone like me to just consult with you. If you can't afford, $150 to $300, out of your budget to talk to a post-production supervisor to kind of, just kind of have them give you a basic workflow, is probably one of the best investments you'll make in your filmmaking process while making a feature film. So if you have any questions at all about post, guys, hit me up on the website. I do offer, I'm going to do self-promote, I do offer consulting as far as post-production workflow, as well as just a consulting, over a phone call, or I can actually build out an entire workflow for you. But I'm not trying to do a hard sell. Honestly, guys, if you can't, if you don't use me, use somebody. I don't care. Just use somebody that can help you with that. There's plenty of amazing post-production supervisors out there who will be more than willing to talk to you for, an hour on the phone or 2 hours on the phone, or meet you for coffee. And you pay them for their time, and they'll work the workflow out for you. And if you can afford to hire them, it is so beneficial to your process. So you can always just head on over to indiefilmhustle.com, and at the very top of the bar it says do you want one-on-one coaching? Just click on that. Or you can head over to indiefilmhustle.com /consulting, and that'll give you all the information you need about what I offer filmmakers. But I'm real passionate about this, guys, because I really want to see your movies get made, no matter what your budget level is. If it's $10,000 or if it's $1 million budget or above, you really need to have someone like me help you with the post-production workflow. So thanks again, guys, for tuning in, and I will see you on the next podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.